When a narcissist realizes you were never coming back, and I want to start with the specific quality of that realization, because never coming back is a different psychological event for the narcissist than simply being gone. Being gone is a supply disruption. It is the removal of a source that the mechanism has been organized around, and the mechanism responds to. Supply disruption with the well-practiced efficiency we have discussed across many previous conversations. The replacement seeking, the narrative management, the conspicuous forward motion, all of these are the construction doing what it has always done when a supply source is no longer present. They are competent responses to a familiar challenge. Never coming back is something the mechanism has less preparation for, because never coming back is not a supply disruption. It is a supply conclusion. And conclusions, in a psychology that has always operated on the premise that supply relationships are fundamentally recoverable, that the right tool deployed at the right moment through the right channel will always produce the re-engagement that makes the conclusion reversible. Conclusions are genuinely foreign territory. Let's be precise about what produces the realization that you were never coming back, because the realization does not arrive the moment you leave or the moment you establish distance or even the moment the no contact is implemented. Those moments produce the supply disruption response. The realization that you were never coming back arrives considerably later, through a specific accumulation of evidence that the mechanism's recovery efforts have been consistently and completely unsuccessful. The hoovering did not produce re-engagement. The indirect monitoring did not reveal any softening in your orientation toward the narcissist. The managed vulnerability performance did not create the opening it was designed to create. The supply economics calculation has been run enough times, with enough new information from enough failed recovery attempts, that the output is no longer the confident not yet that it was producing in the earlier period. The output has shifted. It is producing something the mechanism has almost never produced before in relation to a significant supply source, something closer to the acknowledgement that the recovery is not going to occur, that the conclusion is actually a conclusion, that you were never coming back. The first thing that happens when this realization arrives is the specific interior experience of what the conclusion actually cost the narcissist system. And it is worth being precise about this cost because both the cynical and the comforting versions of this story tend to get it wrong in opposite directions. The cynical version says the cost is minimal, that the narcissist simply moves to the next source without genuine experience of the conclusion's weight. The comforting version says the cost is enormous, that the realization produces the clear-eyed reckoning with what was lost, that produces something resembling genuine remorse. Neither is accurate. The actual cost is specific and significant and organized around something more foundational than either version accounts for. The cost is the permanent removal from the supply landscape of the specific, non-fungible thing you provided, not the supply in general. The mechanism has always been able to source supply in general from new sources. The specific thing, the quality of your particular perception directed at the narcissist, the specific regulatory resource of being known by someone whose knowing was accurate rather than simply admiring, the precise, irreplaceable frequency of your particular caring directed at the actual self rather than at the construction's presentation. That specific thing is gone permanently. The realization that you were never coming back is the realization that what you specifically provided is permanently unavailable. And permanent unavailability of something the mechanism has discovered it cannot source elsewhere is a specific and significant cost, not grief in the full conscious sense. The weight of a permanent gap in the supply landscape that every subsequent acquisition has to navigate around because nothing available fills the specific shape of what is missing. The second thing that happens is the behavioral response to the realization, and the behavioral response is the most specifically revealing expression of what the realization actually produces in the narcissist psychology, because it is the least managed of all the behaviors the dynamic generates. In the early period of your absence, the behaviors were managed, organized around the supply-seeking goal of producing your return, calibrated to the specific frequencies the relationship's history revealed as most effective, deployed with the strategic efficiency the construction brings to supply recovery. The behaviors that follow the realization that you are never coming back are different in quality. Less organized, less specifically targeted, more broadly directed at supply sources generally rather than at you specifically. Because the conclusion that you specifically are never returning has redirected the mechanism's attention toward the general supply landscape in a way the recovery-focused earlier period did not. There is a quality of increased general supply-seeking activity that follows the realization, not the urgency we have discussed, in the context of the construction approaching breakdown, but something with a slightly deflated quality underneath the activity. The seeking that follows the realization has lost the specific focus that the recovery effort was providing. It is supply seeking without the animating purpose of the specific recovery. And the loss of that animating purpose gives the general supply seeking a quality that the people observing it from any proximity may notice without being able to identify. A quality of someone going through familiar motions with slightly less of the conviction that the motions were always deployed with. The realization has taken something from the efficiency of the ordinary supply seeking, not destroyed it, reduced the confidence that animated it. The third thing, and the one that is most interior and most rarely visible from outside the narcissist's psychology, is the specific experience of the actual self in the aftermath of the realization. We have discussed in previous conversations the actual self's experience of your absence in various contexts. The actual self's experience of the realization that you were never coming back is distinct from all of those contexts in a way worth examining carefully, because the actual self has been carrying, throughout the entire period since the relationship ended, the specific, unprocessed awareness of what it received from the relationship and what the construction's behavior was responsible for producing. The 3 a.m. thoughts, the recognition that arrived in the unmanaged moments, the beginning of what functions like regret in the private silences the supply-seeking could not fill. All of that has been present in the actual self's territory throughout. And now the realization that you were never coming back arrives. And the actual self's response to it is not the construction's response, not the redirected supply seeking, not the general supply landscape reorientation. The actual self's response is something more specifically organized around you, around what you actually were, around what the relationship actually contained in the moments when the actual self was present and you were genuinely meeting it, and around what the construction's behavior was responsible for making permanently unavailable. That awareness, specific, honest, organized around the actual history rather than the narrative, is the actual self's full experience of the realization that you were never coming back. And what it produces, and what the narcissist does or does not do with what it produces, and what any of it means for the person who made the decision that the realization is now confirming, that is exactly where we are going next. What the actual self's experience of the realization produces depends on something that varies more significantly between individual narcissists than most of the other elements of this psychology, and being honest about that variation is more useful than offering a single account that flattens the genuine differences into a more satisfying uniformity. The variation is in the degree to which the actual self has access to its own experience, the degree to which the construction's management of the actual self's contents is complete versus permeable, and how the realization's specific weight interacts with whatever permeability exists. For the narcissist whose construction is more complete, whose management of the actual self's experience is more thorough, whose suppression mechanisms are more efficiently resourced, the actual self's experience of the realization is primarily expressed through the indirect channels we have discussed. The 3 a.m. quality, the background flatness underneath the new supply's surface, the specific insufficiency of the general supply landscape that nothing available quite addresses. The actual self's experience is real, but it does not rise to the level of conscious, articulable awareness. It operates as a background condition of the narcissist's subsequent experience, rather than as a specific, recognizable, "this is what I am feeling" interior event. For the narcissist, whose construction is more permeable, whose management of the actual self's experience is less complete, whose suppression mechanisms are more frequently underfunded by the specific pressures the realization has compounded, the actual self's experience of the realization can rise closer to the surface, can produce something that the narcissist experiences as a quality of genuine loss, not organized, not fully conscious, not accompanied by the self-awareness that would allow it to be processed constructively, but present enough to be noticed, present enough to influence behavior in ways that the purely construction-level responses do not fully account for. The reaching that arrives with an unmanaged quality, the specific personal reference that appears in contexts where the strategic management of post-relationship contact would not have deployed it. The moment of genuine contact with someone in the narcissist's orbit, where something of the actual self's experience of the realization briefly surfaces in a way that the person receiving it recognizes as different from the construction's ordinary expression. Neither of these variations produces genuine change in the sense that would make re-engagement safe or different from what engagement has always been. This is the part that requires the most consistent honesty, because the permeability of the construction and the actual self's closer proximity to conscious experience can look, from outside and sometimes from inside, like the beginning of something that would change the fundamental architecture. It is not. The actual self's experience of the realization, however present it becomes, however close to the surface it rises, does not automatically produce the structural change that would make the relationship something other than what it has always been. Structural change requires the kind of sustained, professionally supported reckoning with the actual self's contents that the realization alone cannot produce. The realization may create conditions that are slightly more favorable to that reckoning being undertaken. It does not constitute the reckoning itself, and the people who have been in the dynamic long enough and clearly enough to understand what they are dealing with deserve to hold that distinction firmly in the face of whatever the realization produces in the narcissist's behavior. What the realization means for you, the person whose decision produced it, who is somewhere in the building of the life that the decision was making space for, is ultimately what matters most in this conversation. And what it means is not primarily about the narcissist's experience of it, however genuinely complex and however specifically real that experience is. What it means for you is the confirmation that the decision was a conclusion rather than a negotiating position, that what you created when you made it was an actual ending rather than a pause in a dynamic that was waiting to resume, and that the life you have been building in the space the decision created is genuinely in the space that the decision created, not a temporary arrangement that the narcissist's recovery efforts were going to eventually reverse, but the actual territory of your actual subsequent life, yours, built on a foundation that the realization has now confirmed is solid, that the decision held, that the conclusion was a conclusion, that you were never coming back, and never coming back, received clearly, without the distortion of guilt or the second guessing that the narcissist's recovery efforts were designed to produce, is not a loss. It is not the cold, hard thing that the language makes it sound like. It is the specific, final, complete confirmation that the life you are building is genuinely your own, not organized around the dynamic, not structured by the recovery the narcissist was attempting to produce, simply yours, in the full, uncontested, finally arrived sense of a life that belongs entirely to the person living it. And that belonging, complete, confirmed, no longer requiring the distance to be maintained against the pressure of the recovery effort because the recovery effort has concluded along with the relationship. That belonging is the most specific and the most permanent thing the realization produces. Not for the narcissist. For you. It was always going to be for you. The decision was always yours. The conclusion was always yours. And the life on the other side of it, which the realization has now confirmed is genuinely, permanently on the other side of it, is yours in the most complete sense available, which is the only sense that was ever worth building toward.